The dog found the bag before Cole had finished climbing. He had stopped to catch his breath on the switchback. The altitude was 9,000 feet, and his lungs were reminding him of this. And Rex had gone ahead the way he sometimes did when Cole paused, not straying, just moving, keeping the momentum of the climb even when Cole couldn't. Cole heard the change in the dog's movement, the particular shift from covering ground to covering a specific location, and looked up. Rex was 30 feet above him, off the trail, standing at the base of what Cole had assumed from below was a rock formation. It was not a rock formation. It was the forward section of a military aircraft, partially buried by 2 decades of scree and snowmelt, overgrown along the lower edges with the tough, low-growing scrub that colonizes disturbed ground at altitude. The fuselage was dark gray, matte finished, unmarkable, designed not to be seen. It was not being seen very well even now from 30 feet. Rex was standing at the nose section with his front paws on the metal and his head turned toward Cole, which was the signal he used when he had found something and was waiting for Cole to confirm that he understood what that meant. Cole understood what it meant. He climbed the remaining distance. He put his hand on the fuselage. The metal was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. The cold of a thing that had been given up on and had been lying here in the high-altitude dark for a very long time, patient and broken and uncomplaining. He thought someone was on this aircraft. He thought someone may still be connected to it. Rex was already at the cockpit section, his nose working a seam in the crumpled metal. Cole followed. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe and like this video. And before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing who's out there listening. Cole Henderson had not planned to climb the mountain that morning. He had planned to drive through Mineral County toward the next stop on a trip that had stopped having a clearer destination about 3 weeks and 600 miles ago. He was 52 years old between things, between woes, between addresses, between the version of himself he had been for the last decade and whatever version came next. He was built tall and lean with the quiet economic movements of someone who has spent a lifetime working with his hands. His brown hair, grown a little too long, was streaked with silver at the temples. His face was weathered and rugged, carved by the sun and by memories that were just as harsh. Yet his eyes held a deep, settled kindness that had survived everything. He pulled on his boots each morning, the leather cracked and dark with use, shrugged into his old brown leather jacket, and left it unzipped over the dark flannel shirt beneath, and kept moving because stopping required thinking, and thinking required things he was not yet ready for. Rex had been with him for 11 days. The dog had appeared at a rest stop in eastern Nevada, large, gray-coated with patches of white at the chest and muzzle, amber eyes that regarded Cole with the calm appraisal of an animal that has already assessed the situation and decided. Cole had given him water. The dog had gotten into the truck. The vet in the next town found no chip, no records. Cole had driven on with a dog, and on the third morning he had said Rex out loud without planning to, and the dog had not objected. The specific something Cole was not thinking about had a name. Her name was Anna. Spoem. She was 27 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, and she had been 9 when Cole had left. The divorce had been 12 years ago. The papers, anyway. The actual leaving had been incremental, spread over 3 years before that. The slow withdrawal of a man who did not know how to be in a house where his presence had stopped being enough. He had been a good provider in the material sense. He had not been present in the ways that count to the people who need it. His ex-wife had told him this clearly and without anger on the day he finally left. And the clarity and the absence of anger had been harder to carry than accusation would have been. Anna had been 9. She had stood at the door when he drove away. He had seen her in the rearview mirror, standing very still on the porch with her arms at her sides in the particular posture of a child who has decided not to cry in front of someone. He had seen this. He had driven away anyway. He had called twice a week for 6 months, and then the calls had thinned and the visits had become complicated, and the complications had become reasons not to come back. And then the distance had become so established that closing it would have required a conversation that required explaining everything that came before it. and he had never been ready for that. The letter had been an attempt at ready. He had written it one evening at a motel in Idaho. Anna was still 9. He had been gone for 3 months. When he woke at 4 in the morning with the particular clarity that comes when you have been avoiding something long enough that it stops waiting politely. He had written 3 pages by hand, honest pages, the only 3 pages of honest writing he had ever produced, and had folded them into an envelope and written Anna on the front. The next morning he had driven to a post office. He had stood at the mailbox for 4 minutes. He had put the letter back in his jacket and driven away. The letter had been in the lockbox in the truck bed ever since. That was 18 years ago. He drove the mountain routes and did not think about this. He had been an engineer for 24 years. Structural work, bridge assessment, industrial inspection. Jobs that sent him to remote locations and kept him there for weeks, then months, then long enough that returning became something that required effort rather than something that simply happened. He had been good at the work. The work had been good at making the staying away feel purposeful rather than chosen. He had over the years gotten very skilled at the distinction between a man who travels for work and a man who works in order to travel, and had spent a long time on the wrong side of it without examining which side he was on. Rex watched him from the passenger seat. The dog had a way of watching Cole that was attentive without being demanding, a steady peripheral presence, like a compass that does not insist on being consulted but is always pointing north. Cole had started glancing at the buoy the way he used to glance at instruments, not for information, just for confirmation that the bearing was still correct. The mountain had not been on Cole's route. He had seen the trailhead sign from the highway and had pulled over on what he told himself was an impulse. Though Rex had been watching the mountain through the windshield for 20 minutes before Cole pulled off. The fixed, directional attention that meant Rex had already made a decision and was waiting for Cole to make the same one. Cole had parked and laced up, and they had gone up. At 9,000 feet, the trail became a use path, and the vegetation thinned, and Cole stopped on the switchback to breathe, and Rex went ahead and found what he found. Standing with his hand on the fuselage, Cole looked at the aircraft for a long time. Military, single-seat, fixed-wing, training or reconnaissance configuration. The hardpoints were empty, no ordnance. The impact pattern and the degree to which the site had been absorbed by the mountain told him this had happened a long time ago. 20 years at least. The aircraft had come down on a shallow angle, a controlled crash, a pilot who had still had choices when the mountain got close, possibly survivable. Cole didn't know. The site had the particular quality of a place that had never been disturbed. Not excavated, not marked, not visited, just taken in. Rex had moved to a section of crumpled fuselage near the cockpit and was pawing at a seam in the metal with controlled, specific attention. Not frantic, precise. Cole crossed to him and looked. Behind the collapsed cockpit wall, through a gap in the crumpled metal, was a bag. Military issue, flat, designed to strap to a thigh. It had been protected by the cockpit structure collapsing around it, then sealed from the weather by 20 years of debris. Cole worked the metal seam with the pry bar from his pack. The gap widened. He reached in. The bag did not move. He pulled harder. The bag was caught, a strap snagged behind a piece of frame that had folded over it during impact, pinning it at an angle he couldn't reach from the outside. He could see the bag clearly. He could not get it out. He tried for 20 minutes working the pry bar from 3 different angles, widening the gap incrementally, getting his arm into the shoulder and still coming up short of the strap. His hand came back each time with rust and debris and nothing else. Rex sat beside the fuselage and watched him with the patient attention of an animal that understands a man is working and is not going to rush him. Cole sat back on the rock and looked at the cab and thought. He needed something longer and angled. A hook or a tool with reach. He did not have this. He had a pry bar, a folding knife, a flashlight, and a water bottle. He looked at the bag through the gap. He could see the document sleeve inside it, the corner of it, the clear plastic, a pale rectangle that might be paper. He sat there for a long time looking at it. Rex put his head on Cole's knee, and Cole said quietly to no one specific, "I'm coming back." He took a photograph of the gap and the bag's position with his phone. He marked the location on his GPS. He closed the pry bar and put it in his pack and went down the mountain. The high-altitude light was flat and clear, and the aircraft was invisible again before he had gone 50 feet. He drove to the hardware store in the nearest town, 32 miles on a two-lane road, bought a length of flexible steel cable with a hook on one end, two different sizes of socket extensions, and a pair of channel lock pliers with a long jaw. He drove back up the mountain road, parked at the trailhead, laced up again. Rex jumped out of the truck and went to the trail without being asked. They climbed for the second time. At 9,000 feet, Cole's lungs made the same complaint they had made 3 hours earlier. He ignored them. He found the gap in the fuselage where he had left it, exactly as he had left it. He worked the new tools into the gap. The flexible cable reached the strap, the hook caught, and on the third pull the strap came free. He eased the bag out through the gap. It was intact. The zipper pull had corroded, but he worked it with the knife tip and the zipper opened. Inside, a personal tablet in a hard case, a folded topographical map, a set of dog tags, and beneath all of it, in a sealed plastic document sleeve, a handwritten letter. Cole did not open the letter on the mountain. He sat on the rock beside Rex with the bag's contents laid out on the metal surface of the fuselage and worked through each item in order, the way he had been taught to work through found materials. Inventory first, conclusions after. The dog tags. Captain Raymond Arthur Calloway, USAF. A serial number. A blood type. He read the name twice and set the tag down. The topographical map. A circle in the same area, 4 miles north of the crash site. A flat zone near a ridgeline. An emergency landing zone. Calloway had been trying to reach it, had not made it by 4 miles. Cole looked at the distance on the map for a moment. 4 miles. Then he opened the document sleeve and took out the letter. Multiple pages, folded together, the paper yellowed at the edges but intact. The date at the top, 18 years ago, February. The addressee, for Sarah, my daughter. Read this when you're ready. Cole read those 6 words and set the letter flat on his knee and looked at the mountain around him and breathed for a moment. Rex was warm against his leg. The air at 9,000 feet was completely still. Cole picked up the letter and read. The first page was an apology, not a general one, but a specific, accountable apology that named the exact thing it was sorry for without softening it. Calloway had been absent. Not absent the way men are absent when they are at war. Absent the way men are absent when they are in the house but not in the room, when they are present in the body and somewhere else entirely in every way that matters. He had been there and not there. He had chosen the aircraft over the child again and again in the small, daily choices that accumulate over years into the shape of a life. And his daughter had grown up in the space of his not choosing and had probably learned to call that space normal. He was sorry. He wrote it plainly, without asking for anything in return for the plainness. The second page was about her specifically, things he had observed and remembered and kept. The way she fell asleep in the car on long drives and woke up knowing exactly where they were. The argument she had made at 7 years old about the fairness of bedtime rules, which had been so rigorously logical that he had been unable to counter it and had conceded the point while privately being more proud than he knew how to say. The way she took photographs, given a disposable camera at 8, she had used every frame on details. Cracked paint on the garden gate, the shadow of a telephone wire on the sidewalk, the specific angle of light on a glass of water. She saw things precisely. He had never told her this was one of the things he loved most about her. He was telling her now. The third page was about what he wanted for her, not achievements. He was specific about this, almost firm. Not achievements, not outcomes, not the markers by which people measure a life from the outside. He wanted her to find the thing that cost her something and do it anyway. He wanted her to know that the hardest versions of the right thing and the easiest versions of the wrong thing feel almost identical from the inside, and the difference only becomes clear looking back. And it is always worth paying the cost. He had not always paid it. He wanted her to pay it. He wanted her to be someone who paid it. The fourth page was unfinished. Two sentences and then white space. The pen had stopped mid-paragraph. He had been writing this before a flight. He had folded it, put it in the bag, and flown. He had not come back to finish it. Cole sat on the mountain with the unfinished fourth page in his hands and Rex warm and steady against his leg. He looked at the white space beneath the two sentences. He thought about what the next sentence was. He thought Calloway had known, in the way that people know things when they are writing at the bottom of what might be the last occasion to write, exactly what the next sentence was. He had not had time to write it. Cole thought about time, about how often the last thing is also an unfinished thing, about how many men had driven away from mailboxes with letters in their jacket pockets and lockboxes in their truck beds, telling themselves there was still time, there would be a better moment, they would be ready soon. Have you ever held something that belonged to someone you never met and understood completely what it cost them? Cole had been in the Navy for 4 years early in his working life, before the engineering jobs that had taken him state to state for the next 2 decades. He had spent those 4 years in logistics and communications, not combat, not flight, just the careful procedural work of moving information and materiel through the correct channels in the correct order. He had been good at it. He had liked the clarity of it. A thing had a place it was supposed to be, and your job was to get it there. He had not found that clarity in much else since. He looked at the bag on the rock beside him. The bag had a place it was supposed to be. It had been in the wrong place for 18 years, because the mountain had gotten in the way, and because the official record had then done its own work of burial. His job now was simple and clear in the way that only a few things in his life had ever been. Get it to the right place. Rex shifted beside him and put his nose briefly against the back of Cole's hand. Not demanding attention, just checking in, the small, periodic confirmation of presence that the dog offered without being asked. Cole put his hand on the dog's back. He thought about the letter's fourth page, the two sentences and the white space below them. He had read the two sentences 3 times. The first was the beginning of a thought about forgiveness. Not asking for it, not yet, just introducing the idea, approaching it carefully the way a man approaches a subject he has rehearsed and is still not sure he has the right to raise. The second sentence was incomplete, a subordinate clause that had been building towards something and had not arrived. The pen had stopped. He had been out of time, or out of nerve, or simply out of the few minutes required to finish the sentence, and the sentence had stayed unfinished in the bag on the mountain for 18 years. And now Cole was sitting in the sentence's absence and thinking about what it was going to say. He thought about the people who would read this and understand the feeling, who had their own unfinished sentences, their own fourth pages, their own lockboxes. He sat on the mountain for another 10 minutes after he finished reading, which was not part of any plan. He simply was not ready to move yet, and the mountain did not require him to. The sun had shifted enough to change the angle of the light on the upper slopes, and the particular quality of 9,000-foot silence settled around him. And Rex lay down fully on the rock beside him with his head on his paws, and Cole sat with the weight of the letter in the bag in his pack and thought about a man named Calloway who had written 4 pages before a flight and had not come back to finish them. He thought about what Calloway had been thinking about in the hours before the flight, whether he had known at some level that this one was different, whether the letter had been written because something had felt close, or because the letter had been accumulating for years in the morning of February, though whatever it was had simply been the morning it finally needed to come out. He did not know. He would not know unless he found Calloway, and finding Calloway was a question he had not yet decided to ask. He thought about the name on the letter, Sarah. My daughter. He thought about what it meant to be that daughter, to have been given, at some age, 10, 12, 15, the formal notification, the official language, the folded flag if there was one, the closed chapter of a military loss. To have grown up with that as the permanent shape of her father's absence, not gone, not left, not chose not to come, dead, clean and final and unrevisable. And then possibly to have a stranger knock on her door with evidence that the chapter was not as closed as she had been told. He thought this is going to be the hardest kind of news. Not because the information is terrible, but because it is complicated. And complicated news about a dead father requires a person to rebuild something they had finished building. And the rebuilding is its own kind of grief on top of the original grief. He thought it was still the right thing. He thought the letter had earned its delivery regardless of what the delivery cost. He picked up the one, he put it in his pack, stood up. Rex stood up beside him. They went down. He put Calloway's letter back in the document sleeve and put the sleeve in the bag and put the bag in his pack and stood up. Rex stood up with him. They went down the mountain for the second time that day. Cole made 2 phone calls from the truck at the trailhead. The first was to the county sheriff's office. He reported the location, gave the name from the dog tags, and said he had removed a personal bag containing private correspondence and intended to deliver it to the pilot's next of kin before the chain of custody became official. The deputy took this down and said, "Do what you think is right, Mr. Henderson." He thanked her and ended the call. The second call was to Gerald Marsh, a retired Air Force records researcher Cole had worked with 3 years earlier. He gave Marsh the name, the serial number, the date range, and the general location. Marsh called back in 40 minutes. Captain Raymond Arthur Calloway, USAF, had gone down in a training flight over the mountain range 18 years ago in February. The aircraft was listed as unrecovered. Calloway had been listed as missing, presumed dead. Cole listened carefully. He asked, was he recovered? Any subsequent record? Marsh paused. He said, there is a notation. A hiking party found Calloway 3 days after the crash. He had been treated for injuries and had recovered. Cole sat with this. He said, then why was he listed as missing? Why was his family not notified? Marsh said, the notation says at Calloway's own request, his survival was not disclosed to his listed next of kin. Cole read that back in his head twice. At Calloway's own request, his daughter had believed for 18 years that her father was dead. Her father had asked the military to keep it that way. Cole asked Marsh to keep looking. Any contact information, any current address. Marsh called back that evening. 2 addresses, one for Sarah Calloway, 26 years old, Claremont, Oregon, a teacher, and one for Raymond Calloway, currently residing in Medford, Oregon. Cole looked at the 2 addresses for a long time. Medford to Claremont was 71 miles. Calloway had been living 71 miles from his daughter for an unknown number of years. He had known where she was. He had not gone. Cole sat in the truck at the trailhead in the early dark and tried to build the shape of this man. A pilot who had written an honest, loving letter before a flight that was supposed to kill him. Who had survived. Who had stood on a mountain 3 days after surviving his own death. Injured, cold, alone. And had decided that the man who came off that mountain was not the man who should show up at his daughter's door. That the letter in the bag said everything the living man could not say convincingly in person. That his daughter was better served by a dead father who had loved her plainly than by a living one who might, over the years, keep failing her in the same ways. Cole did not know if this was right. He thought it was the saddest calculation a man could make about himself. He thought about his own lockbox, about Anna, about the letter he had written honestly at the bottom of a motel room night when the truth had come up through the floor and demanded to be put somewhere. He had written it. He had stood at the mailbox. He had chosen the lockbox. He had told himself there would be a better time, that he needed to be ready, that showing up with a letter was not the same as showing up. He thought about Calloway living 71 miles from his daughter and not closing the distance. He thought that is one version. His version, the lockbox, the mountain routes, the not ready, was another version of the same calculation. Different numbers, same math. He was done with the math. He put the truck in drive and headed north toward Claremont. He thought about what it would take to close 71 miles. It was not a physical problem. He had covered 1,200 miles in 2 days to reach Claremont. 71 miles was nothing. An hour on a state highway, a Sunday afternoon. The distance was not the obstacle. He understood this because he recognized it. He had lived at varying distances from Anna for 18 years, sometimes 400 miles, sometimes 1,200, and the distance had never been the obstacle. The obstacle was the conversation that waited at the end of the distance. The one that required him to stand in front of a person who had been 9 years old when he drove away and explain what had happened in the years since and why he was here now. Calloway had stood on a mountain 3 days after surviving his own death and had made a calculation. Cole could build it, a man who has written an honest letter about his failures, has named them specifically, has not protected himself from them. That man knows something about himself when he comes off the mountain. He knows what he is capable of on paper. He is less certain what he is capable of in person. The letter was finished, or nearly finished, before the flight. The living man would have to go on being the living man, with all the daily opportunities to fail that entailed. Calloway had looked at this and had decided the letter was better than the man, had decided his daughter was better off with the version of himself that had written honestly before a flight than with the version that would show up at her door, injured and alive, and carrying 20 years of the same absences the letter apologized for. Cole understood this calculation. He did not agree with it, but he understood it with a precision that had nothing abstract about it, because he had made a version of the same calculation standing at a mailbox in Idaho 18 years ago. He had looked at the letter in his hand, the honest letter, the bottom of the motel room letter, and he had thought, what happens after this? She reads it, and then what? He shows up? He tries to be the man the letter describes? He had not been ready to be that man. He had put the letter in his jacket and driven away. The difference between him and Calloway, he thought, was that Calloway had been consistent, had made the calculation once and had held to it for 18 years. Cole had made the calculation repeatedly at every mailbox, every missed birthday call, every year-end when he had thought about calling and had not called, and had held to it each time, consistent in the wrong direction. 18 years of consistent. Rex was asleep in the passenger seat with his chin on the armrest, breathing slowly, entirely at peace with the direction of travel. Cole drove north through the dark and thought about the letter in the lockbox and about Anna, 27, who taught elementary school in Portland and who had her mother's eyes and who had, according to the one email her mother had sent 3 years ago, become the kind of person who was very good at being present for other people. Cole had thought about that phrase for a long time after reading it. Very good at being present. He thought about what it took to become that, coming from where she had come from. He thought it had probably cost her something. He thought she had probably paid the contents. He had written in the letter in the lockbox that he wanted her to be someone who paid the cost. She had become that without the letter. She had become that without him. He was driving north through the Nevada dark toward Oregon to deliver another man's letter, and somewhere in Portland, his own daughter was very good at being present for the people around her, and he had a letter in a lockbox that she had never read, and he was 52 years old and out of reasons not to send it. Rex settled in the passenger seat and put his head against the window and watched the dark mountain road unroll behind them. And Cole drove through the night thinking about a pilot on a mountain and a letter in a bag and a distance of 71 miles that a man had chosen not to cross. She did not open the door when Cole knocked. He heard movement inside, a pause in whatever was happening, then stillness, the specific stillness of someone who has decided to wait before responding. He said through the door, "My name is Cole Henderson. I drove from Nevada. I found something on a mountain that I think belongs to you. I can leave it on the porch if you'd rather not open the door." Silence. Then her voice, closer than he expected, just on the other side of the door. "What did you find?" He said, "A bag, military issue, with a letter inside it." Another silence, longer. Then, "Who was it from?" He said, "Raymond Calloway." The door opened. She was in her mid-20s, dark-haired, with the alert and guarded expression of someone who had learned to read situations quickly and who was reading this one with the full attention it deserved. She did not take the bag. She looked at it. She looked at Cole. She said, "My father is dead." He said, "I know that's what you were told." She looked at him for a long time. He did not say anything else. She said, "Come in." He followed her to the kitchen table. Rex came in and settled near the door without being asked, giving the room its space. Cole set the bag on the table and stepped back. She sat down and looked at the bag and did not touch it for a full minute. Cole stood near the window and looked at his hands. He was not going to rush this. He was not going to help her get there faster than she was going. She unzipped the bag. She took out the items one by one, show him, the tablet in its case, the map, the dog tags, and set each one on the table with the careful, precise movement of someone handling irreplaceable things. Then the document sleeve. She held it and looked at the pale rectangle of paper inside it. She said not to Cole, "This is his handwriting." He said nothing. She opened the sleeve and took out the letter and read. He did not watch her. He looked at the window, at the street outside, at the ordinary afternoon continuing around the room where something sealed for 18 years was being opened. He heard the pages turn. He heard her breathing change on the second page. He heard her stop. A long silence. Then she said, "Is he alive?" He said, "I have information that he survived the crash. Where he is now, I don't know for certain." She said, "That means you do know." He looked at her. She was watching him with the steady, caution expression of someone who has been managing incomplete information for a long time and knows exactly when she's being given more of it. He said he was living in Medford, as of recently. She said, "Medford, that's 70 miles from here." She said it quietly without an upward inflection. Not a question, a fact she was absorbing. Cole said yes. She set the letter down on the table and looked at it. She did not say anything for a while. Cole did not fill the silence. Rex shifted near the door. A small sound, just his weight resettling. She looked at the dem. She looked back at the letter. She said, "He knew where I was." Cole said, "Yes." She said, "And he didn't come." He said, "No." She sat with this. She was not crying. She was doing something harder than crying. She was thinking clearly about something that had every reason to make thinking impossible. Cole watched her and thought about the first page of the letter. The specific, accountable apology. The line, "I had been there and not there." He thought that Calloway had known this about himself with great precision. He had known it in 1962 and had known it on the mountain and had known it in Medford for however many years he had been in Medford. The knowing had not been the problem. Acting on the knowing had been the problem. That was familiar. After a while, she looked up. She said, "Why did you drive here?" He said, "Someone wrote a letter and didn't get to deliver it. He thought it deserved to arrive." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the letter and folded it carefully along its original creases and put it back in the sleeve. She stood up. She walked him to the door. At the door, she looked at Rex, who was on the porch steps watching the street. She said, "What's his name?" Cole said, "Rex." She looked at the dog for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for driving here." He said, "I'm sorry it took 18 years." She said, "It took 18 years because that's how long it took. That's not on you." He went down the porch steps. Rex fell into step beside him. At the truck, he sat in the driver's seat and did not start the engine for a minute. He thought about what she had said. That's how long it took. He thought about the lockbox in the truck bed. He thought about the difference between Calloway's 18 years and his own. Calloway had written the letter and let the mountain decide whether it arrived. Cole had written the letter and had made the decision himself. Standing at a mailbox in Idaho and had made the wrong one. He got out of the truck. He opened the truck bed and took out the lockbox. The key was on his keychain. It had been on his keychain for 18 years because removing it would have been acknowledging a decision he had not been ready to acknowledge. He opened the box. The letter was there. 3 pages, plain envelope, Anna written on the front in his handwriting from 18 years ago. He took it out and looked at it. He read it standing at the truck bed in the early evening light on a residential street in Claremont, Oregon. It was a better letter than he remembered. Honest in the way things written at the bottom of something true tend to be honest. Without strategy, without management, without the protection a man puts around himself when he has something to protect. He had been 34 when he wrote it. He folded it, put it back in the envelope, and wrote Anna's current address on the front. He walked to the mailbox at the end of the block. He put the letter in. He stood there for a moment after, his hand still on the mailbox, the way you stand after doing something you have been not doing for a long time and have finally done. Rex was sitting at the truck watching him. Cole walked back. He got in. He started the engine. He thought about the drive ahead. He thought about Anna, somewhere in Portland, who would open a letter in a few days and find the 3 pages he had written when she was 9, honest and late in hers. He thought about Sarah Calloway at the kitchen table, reading a letter from a man who had been 71 miles away for years and had not crossed the distance. He thought about the difference between those two things. Not the distance, but what a man does with it. Rex put his chin on Cole's shoulder. Cole put his hand on the back of the dog's neck and held it there for a moment. Then he drove north, and the evening light came through the windshield, and the road went forward, and that was enough.